Hey Instagram, it's Dr. Rick. I'll be doing an unboxing today on my protein powder. So this is the protein powder I take. This is 20 grams per 2 scoops, and it's mostly pea and quinoa. And it also has about 9 grams of carbohydrates. So there's the label, and I don't think that's taking into account the fluid that you're going to mix it in with, but 2 scoops is fine. 20 grams is great. I really try to push 30 grams. So spoiler alert, 30 grams of protein per meal, I believe, as I've said in my previous videos on protein, should be the max. I think that's what the gut can tolerate. The question, though, is if the gut can tolerate absorbing 30 grams per meal, and we eat only 2 meals a day, that doesn't cut it. So the intermittent fasting craze has really blossomed in the last 2 years. So has fasting mimicking diet. And it has done well for a lot of my patients that are trying to fight cancer, trying to reset their gut with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, on any autoimmune disease, definitely with regards to just losing weight. Because unfortunately, greater than 50% of the population in America is obese. That includes kids. And when we have obesity or body mass indexes that are higher than 25, I think it's worth it to throw anything at that kind of a problem to lower the risk factors for when you get older. So intermittent fasting has worked. The old concept of skipping breakfast was usually poo-pooed, but now I think we've given ourselves an excuse because the data is behind it. Fasting mimicking diet is 5 days a month of lower calories than usual. I'll put videos down below, and it definitely has helped with regards to cancer fighting. So the question now is, for all my warriors that have cut their weight down and maintained it through COVID, now what do we do? Because most of my warriors are 40, 50, or 60 years of age. I have a couple that are in their youth and a little bit of a different problem, so I'll just address my older athletes for now. Now, if you're doing what I'm doing, intermittent fasting, you're usually not eating until 11 or 12. And then you stop eating at about 8 or 9, and you go to sleep early. Very boring. But we'll live till we're 90 and 100, and we'll hopefully be disability free. The problem, though, is if you only have that small window that's called a feeding window, and maybe you can get 2 and maybe 2.5 meals in that feeding window, the problem is, how do you get your protein content in? So there's a couple of concepts we have to understand. The first is protein. So there's a little bit of a difference in protein. There's animal protein, there's plant protein. As I said, this is pea and quinoa, and it tastes pretty good. It goes by fast. It's about 30 bucks. This is mostly pea, but here's what I wanted to show you with this is that we have a listing, and this is a spoiler, but a listing of amino acids. You'll see leucine is here too, but it's underdosed. So there's something called a leucine threshold. Leucine is one of the amino acids that are called BCAAs, branched chain amino acids. Leucine, out of the 3 in particular, has been studied by Donald Lehman. This is an old book from the 70s that I was able to score on Amazon. And this little marker here is showing the chapter, page 45, I think, where he looked into leucine. He looked into many different things: protein, muscle, exercise, relationship, even cholesterol. It's a great book, old data that has been fine-tuned now, up to date, but it's nice to see that people like Donald Lehman from the past and or Stu Phillips now at McMaster University are still trying to dive into this stuff because it's science. This is 2 scoops per serving, and 2 scoops will give you 20 grams, which is good. I don't have my whey here, W-H-E-Y. Whey is animal protein. It comes from milk, and it gets absorbed really quick. The volume of whey that's necessary, you can sometimes see some powders that have 25 grams of protein, or I think I've seen a 30 gram per scoop protein. Whether it was whey or whey and casein, I'm not sure. Whey is very quickly absorbed. It's a fast protein. It comes from cows. It's very quickly absorbed. So that's a good thing. But the problem with the plant-based is that the amino acid content in plants is acceptable, Soy, believe it or not, is probably one of the better ones. Hemp too. This happens to be pea protein, rice protein, and soy protein. This one in particular has a couple other things. Spirulina is one of them. But this too has a nice label of the amino acid content. But if you look and check out the leucine, it's not that great. So that's the problem with a lot of plant proteins, is the components of the amino acids and then the volume. So it wasn't in his book, but it was in newer data as far as how much leucine. There's something called the leucine threshold where body can't absorb anything past a certain amount. And leucine, of all the amino acids, has been shown to trigger muscle protein synthesis. So this is a good thing. And if you can get a decent amount of protein, I say about 30 grams per meal, and in total, and I'll get to this later, but in total, I would push the envelope with, at the base, all my athletes or non-athletes older than 50 really have to be on at least 1 gram per pound of protein. So if you calculate that out, if I'm 148, 150 on a bad day, I have to have 150 grams of protein. That's a base. Now, in my bodybuilding years, I used to push as much as possible. There is a confusing conversion between grams per kilo and grams per pound. But the easy way to remember for my athletes is just 1 gram per pound of body weight. Now, you can get argumentative and say it has to be lean mass body weight or muscle weight, but that's too hard to compute. So my suggestion is just that as an entry level. Now, if you're an athlete and you're trying to grow muscle, you can push harder. There's a work of Dr. Jose Antonio out of University of Southern Florida. And for 13 months, I believe he tested some athletes and he pushed them hard, I think up to 3 grams per pound. And there was no detriment. We always worry about nitrogen, but if you look at where the baseline RDA of protein came from, it was studied in the early 70s at MIT, and they just tested out students as far as blood tests before and after a certain protein ingestion. And they found that when the students got to 0.6 grams per kilo, going back to kilos again, that they had a negative nitrogen balance, but when they got to 0.8 grams per kilo, they got a positive nitrogen balance. Now, what did that mean? That just meant that there started to be more available nitrogen in the urine/blood. So the theory was, if you get to a certain level of protein ingestion, you got to be careful. The nitrogen has to go somewhere, and the body might be taxed to try to get rid of extra nitrogen. That was the theory. But the same data out of MIT was tested later in the 80s and then the 90s, and it kept on pushing, because the first study was with medical students, the second study was with cardiovascular athletes, and the next study was with bodybuilders or weight trainers. And I believe that they let off at the top level of, I believe it was 1.8 grams per kilo. The end result with all these numbers is, I think everybody should be 1 gram per pound. So 148 grams per day of protein. Now you can figure yours out. If you're 200 pounds, 200 grams per day of protein. And the problem is protein absorption has topped out. So if protein absorption tops out at like 30 grams of protein that's functionally absorbable to get into the bloodstream after you eat, anything after 30 grams per meal might not get in. Or it might just be slowed down as far as absorption. So that might be a good thing, but you could be wasting all that protein. So ideally, I'd have to divide 150 into 3 or 4 meals. That's impossible when your feeding window is so narrow, unless I'm eating constantly, and that's a chore. To go back to my first argument, plant-based athletes, because we have to take in more volume compared to meat eaters to get the protein per meal, the problem with plant-based protein is it comes with the price tag of carbohydrate. So let's see, in this one, 14 grams of protein per serving, but 5 grams of carbohydrate. That's not so bad. But again, if I wanted to get 30 grams a meal, I'd have to do 2 servings. That would push me to 10 grams. That's 10 grams in 1 meal of carbohydrate. So that kind of already pushes me into a potential insulin resistance issue. If I was to take that 4 times a day, 4 times 10 is 40 grams of carbohydrates per day. No, I mean, I'm strict. The higher you go with the carbohydrates, the more you spike insulin. That's getting too deep into the anabolic threshold, but I guess I might as well say that. That is like an open door, and I've spoken about how glucose gets shooed into the muscle after eating if you exercise. You don't even need insulin. You just exercise and the glucose drops. Well, protein will do the same thing. There's a window of 30 minutes to 3 hours. Usually if you get that protein or that building block presented to the muscle right after exercise within 30 minutes, that's the theory, it gets sucked in because it can stimulate mTOR during the anabolic window right after exercise, and has to be some form of resistance exercise. Muscle is really ripe for absorbing protein, or more specifically amino acids for building blocks to start the repair process. And this is a nice study that was published in Nature, excellent journal, and it talked about the leucine threshold, the anabolic window, and also something called IEF3 is one of the messengers when stimulated that gets the door open so amino acids can enter into the cell to start building, the muscle cell. So if you exercise, the door opens. After 30 minutes, supposedly the door closes. You can still get a protein assimilation, but the amino acids have a harder time getting in. Same thing with glucose. There's a window of opportunity after some form of exercise where glucose is allowed to transport in. Now, I think it's called GLUT4. So same thing, if the messenger opens a glucose door, you can drop the blood glucose quickly with exercise. I mean, you can also do it with insulin if you inject insulin, but why not do exercise? The same thing with exercise and development of muscle mass, or at least muscle sensitivity, is if you do the right amount of protein at the right amount of time, and you repeat it over the course of that day, you will theoretically grow muscle. Now, you're going to have to exercise one way or another, and I just mentioned that. Some people think that if you just do protein, you'll get big, and you won't. Now, there's a study that was done somewhere that they compared people who exercise to people who don't exercise, to people who took protein with exercise, people who took protein and didn't exercise, and obviously the people who didn't exercise and didn't take protein didn't get anything. The people who exercised and took protein, they got something. But what's important or interesting was the people who did not exercise and took protein, they started to melt away fat. Now, it was an underpowered study, but it has a lot to do with, a lot to say about the use of protein and dialing in your macronutrients. So going back to my original proposal, it is tough as a plant-based athlete to get it in. So if you're following the rule of 1 gram per pound, and you try to divide that up into a small feeding window, you're going to have a problem. I have had some people still continue the feeding window, but right before sleeping, they stick in another 30 grams of protein. And got to be careful with the reflux issue. But again, I think most of us are not into professional bodybuilding. I might be doing that in a couple of years. Not much competition at the age of 60 or over, so I might kind of level the playing field. However, I think it's still important to utilize your macronutrients in the right way because we have to be efficient. At an early age, 20 years of age, maybe up to 26, 30, you can do whatever you want. You can even eat tar and still get muscular change or muscular size. But as we start to become desensitized to protein, I think we need more inspiration to develop muscle. Those of you who do fasting mimicking or intermittent fasting know that we want to try to decrease mTOR. So mTOR is an enzyme in the body, and it's in each cell. And Walter Longo found that if you stimulate mTOR, it might increase chances for cancer. And that is true. I do not think that we have to stimulate mTOR all day long. I think you're asking for trouble. But I do believe that if you pulse your mTOR stimulation, in addition to EIF3, I think you'll be able to fight cancer, grow muscle, have longevity, and come out as a victor. So that's just an assumption. There hasn't been enough data to compare intermittent fasters, athletes, older athletes, and protein or plant-based. So that is going to be a problem. But listen, you don't need a multi-million-dollar study to say what will probably help you. If you're plant-based, I think that's fair, but you're going to have to sacrifice taking in carbohydrates, and it has to be healthy carbohydrates, so you can't ignore that. And if you are going to use plant, you have to do several different types of plants. So I just threw in a couple things. These are my nuts from Target. These are assorted non-salted nuts, and there's the ingredients. So this has per quarter cup about 5 grams of protein, but it also has 6 grams of carbohydrate. So if I was to do 30 grams of this, I would be, again, overdoing the carbohydrates. But if I'm plant-based, I can work with that. Sometimes if you slow down the absorption, then you're not going to knock up your insulin much. But again, if you slow down the absorption of your protein, you miss the window where it's allowed to go in, that 30-minute window, which, again, there's a lot of different levers to pull here, but just make you more aware. My cool meat substitute. But this is here. This is mostly pea protein, and that's the nutritional label. Hopefully it's not too shiny. But this has 10 grams of protein per patty, 10 grams of protein, and it's 5 grams of carbs. Unfortunately, the other thing that you should know with this is the sodium, 175 per patty. So anything that's processed, you're going to be asking for more sodium. Just for those of you who can't fit in whole food, this is another Trader Joe's product, and this is falafel. So it has per serving, which is 3 falafels, you'll have 10 grams of protein and 4 grams of carbs. So I don't know how you're going to stop at 3 or 4 falafels. I mean, they're this small and they're yummy, especially when you heat these up. Trader Joe's is pretty good. But that'll get into, if you're trying to get 30 grams of protein per meal, they're going to be jacking up your carbs again. So that's the give and take of that. So that could also be why when the carbs go too high, then insulin gets turned on. And when insulin gets turned on, it screws up the way muscle is supposed to grow. I used to eat this all the time. This is tuna fish. And in one packet of tuna fish, you can have 13 grams of protein and 2 grams of carbs. So a little bit better. But again, if you're plant-based, you're not going to be doing this. If you're pescatarian, you might do this. But just FYI, the only reason I did tuna in my bodybuilding years was couldn't afford anything. Steak was too expensive. I don't think we even have a grill. I used to live with 2 bouncers and a bartender in Wildwood, New Jersey. Something from Costco. This is mackerel, and it has 20 grams of protein. There's your reading. This is from Jewel-Osco. That's one of the grocery store chains around here. There's your protein reading, 15 grams per can, and this has a lot of omega-3. But again, you're trusting the labels. And this is an egg. This has about 6 grams of protein. A lot of other good things in this, lutein especially for eyes. Something you might be, but again, so if you're a plant-based person, strict, then it's going to be a problem. So you can see that there is a challenge if you're an athlete, especially you're plant-based, to try to get the proper amount of amino acids in. And these are some of the bullet points that you have to remember. Again, bottom line is try to shoot for a base. Everybody try to shoot for a base of 1 gram per pound, 1 gram per 1 pound of body weight. If you do that, I think you're safe. Going less than that, unless you have disease of some sort, but for that, you have to ask your doctor. I think that's safe. If you're exercising or trying to put on more muscle mass, then I go higher. But again, that's supposed to be fine-tuned, personally designed. So if you don't have a doctor, see me on my YouTube channel and I can give you a consult. If you do have a doctor, challenge him and see if he knows what he's talking about. But you have to know about your composition. So it's not just take a bunch of protein. If you're a carnivore, meat eater, then you should be okay. Steaks are easy, they're very dense, and they have a lot of protein in a limited amount of size or weight. If you're plant-based, you're going to have to kind of be creative, because just doing pea or just doing soy or just doing brown rice might not be enough. You might have to mix a couple different types of amino acids or proteins of the plant kingdom to get the right amino acid profile. Whatever profile you come up with, 30 grams per meal is the max. So if you go 1 gram per pound, and as my example, I just say 150, 30 grams of protein per meal is max. That means I have to eat 5 meals a day. If I don't, then I'm cutting it short, and I'm really trying to bulk up before I hit 14,000 feet again. I think that having muscle helps you get past certain challenges. I'm gonna have to try to do it, so I might have to go off the reservation as far as plant for my training now, but it's something to consider. Now, if you do have 30 grams of protein per meal, and you have 1 gram per pound per day of total protein, in addition to your whatever you want as far as carbs and fats and other things, then you gotta make sure that your leucine per meal is at least 2 to 3 grams. So that's gonna be a complicated one to get. And again, if you look at the leucine content here, it's only 1.5, maybe 2 at the most. It's not going to be enough. So if you underdose leucine, you might still get some. In Lehman's book, he did do studies, page 45, where they tested leucine at 0.5 grams of leucine and still said that it did some kind of stimulation. But the best open channel for developing muscle is going to be 2 to 3 grams. So you're going to have to make sure that you have 2 to 3 grams of leucine per meal if you want muscle building or muscle protein synthesis. I got that from Lane Norton. I like what he trained under Don Lehman as well. He's a little bit more youthful. Nothing against Don Lehman, but I like Lane because he's a bodybuilder, ex-bodybuilder, and a power lifter. So 3 grams of leucine, 2 to 3. At least 30 grams per meal, at least 1 gram per pound of body weight, especially if you're starting an exercise routine. If you're deep into an exercise routine, you can go higher. You just have to get that cleared, and you can contact me or consult me. I can give you a protein definition. So we did talk about absorption, how it's limited, and how 30 grams is the top out. We talked about distribution, where you spread it throughout the day. I would not wake up middle of the night to take extra protein, maybe if you're in competition, but you run the risk of screwing up your sleep, and that's not good either. So if you screw up your sleep to take protein, then that's cool, you get the protein content, but then your body and muscle realize that you're not getting enough sleep, and it retaliates by not building muscle. So again, you change your own hormones, so I don't think it's worth it. There's also an anabolic window that we talked about, where there's a certain amount of time when you can get that protein in, and it's typically about 30 minutes. So I will leave you with that the other thing that makes it a challenge with plant-based protein is that it's slower to absorb. Protein itself, or fat, will slow down the gastric content so that the stomach can churn it more. So it slows the absorption. So you might miss that 30-minute window unless you have a fast-absorbing protein like whey. But again, if you're plant-based, you're not going to want to do whey. Casein's a little slower in its absorption, but it's a little bit harder to find casein. The plant-based proteins, I can't find any studies as far as the speed of absorption. If your bottom line is you just want to grow muscle mass and you're doing as best as you can and you can't get that muscle to respond, you might want to change around your macros. And if this is way too confusing, get a dietitian or consult me on my Herbal 411 page. If you are making gains, cool. I would suggest that you pulse your exercise, you pulse your protein, and you pulse your maxes per year so that you'll always have some kind of goal. My guys who do body weight exercises, I admire that because it's better than nothing in COVID, but you really have to keep on building up. If you get too used to just using body weight, and I mean, you'll get short of breath and you'll have a fast heart, but you won't grow muscle. And that's what we want to do. I don't want to get everybody huge. I want to get everybody strong enough so they don't fall down when they're 70 years of age, or at least they can get off the ground. They can get out of their car without a hitch. They can run in the parking lot in case it's raining. Those things, jump on a tree, rock climb to 14,000 feet with Dr. Saguil. All those things I think are essential for just existing. If you can't do that and in your 70s, you need to fix that. If you can't do that and you're in your 30s and 40s, there's something wrong. So please don't be complacent. Always try to strive for something better. Hopefully this gives you a couple of good ideas. Plant-based or carnivore, doesn't matter. And if you have your favorite protein, put it down below. Take this information to your doctor. See if they can help you devise how it fits into your life. Stay safe, exercise, and I'll see you at the next video.